Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 749, written by Glodden, When the Sun Suddenly Says Goodnight. So, I probably wouldn't have thought this was weird, except for I wasn't the only person who saw it. Back in high school, I used to walk home with my, at the time, best friend. I lived at the top of a huge hill. Before I left my friend to walk the rest of the way home, we would usually stand at the bottom of the hill just to finish our conversation. I'm talking to my friend when everything is just suddenly dark. For a good couple of seconds, I couldn't see anything, but my eyes were still open and I could still feel my feet on the ground. I could even still feel the presence of my friend in front of me, but we both had fallen silent and I couldn't hear any sound. No birds, no nothing. Then suddenly, like someone had flicked a switch, the lights were back and everything was normal. My friend and I were staring silently at one another. I was ready to shrug it off and assume my eyes were playing tricks on me until my friend pipes up. Did it just get really dark all of a sudden? We then both freaked out as we confirmed that we both experienced total darkness. It couldn't have been a cloud covering the sun because the dark was instant and total. It was exactly like a light switch had been flipped off and on. Anyway, time has passed and I don't think about it too much, but it's definitely one of my more strange memories. Case notes for file 749, When the Sun Suddenly Says Goodnight. So these kind of glitches where the sun suddenly stops shining seem to be very common when in groups of people, which tells me that it's localized to a specific area, although it's not quite as large as an entire town or anything like that. More of an area the size of maybe a large store, and I don't think it has anything to do with the sun itself. I don't think somehow it's just not producing light for a split second or a couple seconds in this case. Now I think it's down to our perception of it. For some reason, there's something that is interfering with our brain's ability to either process or receive stimuli. So people often mention not being able to hear. They can still feel you felt the presence of your friend. So the sensory input from sound, pressure waves in the air doesn't translate. So there's some kind of block going on. Maybe it's even some sort of weapon test. Maybe a drone is hovering high above and somehow inducing this lack of sight and sound. I wouldn't be that surprised if this was some sort of government conspiracy or they're testing a non-lethal weapon. If you think about it, it's not that far-fetched. They have flashbangs already, stun guns, and etc. If there's some sort of weapon that is invisible, can be used from a long range, and leave someone without permanent damage, unable to see or hear, yeah, that wouldn't be that surprising. Bonus file, written by Cosmic Ray 25, When the Dead Become Arsonists. I live right beside a funeral home, owned by an old man. I've lived here for a couple of years right in the center of town and never had any issues, until a few months ago when strange things started to occur. Behind the funeral home is a small parking lot that stays empty, except for the hearse. There's a small hill and a tree line. I've never seen the old man who lives and owns the funeral home. I only hear him play the piano around 9 p.m. once a week. One night, at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was outside smoking and I saw this huge, shadow-like figure, about 10 to 15 feet tall by the trees. I started recording on my phone. I've seen that tree line thousands of times because it's right in my point of view from where I sit. I've never seen anything so bizarre until a few weeks after that. I was upstairs fixing my curtain in the window, just shy of midnight, I'd say, when I spot a man's face looking up at me. This was behind my house, and the man who lives behind me was in his apartment watching TV. He sits next to his window. I could only see what looked like an unfamiliar man's face, which was lit up in a bluish-gray tint. He was just looking straight up at me. He had a pale face and dark eyes, and I can only describe his facial expression as dark and chilling. I could just feel in my gut that something wasn't right. I had an overwhelming sense of dread. So I took my phone and started to record him from below. When I was recording, I noticed my phone was picking up multiple faces in the dark. I think I counted 4 to 5 pale, translucent, ghostly faces surrounding the first one in some of the video. Now I know it could just be face pareidolia. I try to see myself as a logical person, but this was so ominous, I was very frightened. Other strange noises like tapping and scratching on the walls, hearing clicking noises. At 2 a.m. the same night, a building at the end of my street caught on fire. I couldn't sleep, for obvious reasons, and saw my window just explode with orange light. So right at this moment, while crapping my pants of course, I slowly get up to look. The entire building was engulfed with flames. Luckily, the building was empty. Thankfully, I made it through the night without having a complete nervous breakdown. 2 days later, word gets out. The old man who runs a nursing home has been caught stacking up bodies on top of each other in the basement for the second time. His reasoning for not properly handling them was he was retired. I heard he had an assistant, but they were on vacation. At one point, there were 12 bodies stacked and one in major decomposition. It's the second time in a year his license was suspended. He also got in trouble for swapping the cremated remains of at least 2 of his clients. He had a bunch of conditions when his license was reinstated the first time, but clearly he didn't follow them. But even just hearing him play the piano gives me the heebie-jeebies. Case notes for the bonus file. When the dead become arsonists. Fire to us represents intensity, and in this case, power and even rage. The spirits or echoes that you saw were infuriated by the fact that they were not being taken care of, at least their physical bodies as they passed away, were being mistreated by this old man who was literally stacking them up and leaving them to decompose. How cruel. Early on you mentioned seeing a giant shadow figure though. That's interesting. Normally shadow figures are reported to be rather small. I don't think this was an actual shadow figure, but just some sort of artifact from a lot of echoes being around. It would actually be interesting if all reports of spontaneous combustion are caused by the manifestation of extreme will and hatred from spirits or echoes that are lingering behind. And I think that hatred could be fueled in part because if you're bound to this planet, still following with gravity and everything, it makes sense that if you are still connected, you'd be connected to some piece that's still on the planet. And what else could connect even stronger than your own physical body still around? It makes sense to be cremated, just in case. Because I wouldn't want to be lingering around forever because my body is not burned. Or maybe it depends on decomposition too. Do you have to salt and burn bones to free a spirit? Bonus file. Written by naocalemala, the hotel entity. My family and I were recently on a trip in Glasgow. We stayed in this fantastic hotel that had previously been around a while. Lots of plaques and photos of famous people who had stayed prior. The first night, I woke up, though not abruptly really, to what I can only describe as a presence. I heard distinctly, and by that I mean somehow the words entered my brain, but it wasn't quite a voice per se. Someone said, "I'm watching you." But it wasn't scary at all somehow. It was absolutely a matter of fact. I don't have any other experiences like this, and I've always thought of myself as a big scaredy cat, so I have no idea how I fell back to sleep. Not only that, I woke up the next day feeling great and didn't even remember to tell anyone. The morning following the next night, my mom, who was sharing the room with me, says at breakfast, "You all aren't going to believe me, but I swear someone was in our room last night." I remember thinking, just be still and let them finish whatever they're doing. Needless to say, this jogged my memory and I relayed my experience. The fact that we had 2 independent experiences in the same room kinda confirms for me that something is in that hotel. I asked the staff right before we left and they kinda smiled and said, "Not sure, but you're not the first to mention this." Bonus file for the hotel entity. This reminds me of a story I narrated pretty recently about someone that had an encounter with aliens in the desert at night. The way they described it was, the aliens were able to communicate directly into their mind, as in not speaking verbally, but the thoughts just appeared in their mind. And they weren't scared either. And that's a tremendously important detail to mention here. In both cases, they weren't scared. Now maybe there's some sort of suppression mechanism for the instincts we have, fight or flight. Maybe that's necessary to communicate with us, because if not, we'd be terrified. Or maybe they really just don't mean us any harm. And I would kind of fall into the latter camp of that assumption, because if they meant us harm, we wouldn't even know we're under attack. There's so many ways to kill the human race if you have the technology needed to travel between solar systems or galaxies. Just having a ship that can go that quick, you could literally just ram it into the planet, and the energy in that is more than nuclear weapons, just a kinetic energy. Not to mention any other thing they could target, create a genetic disorder or infertility or disease, anything. There's so many options when you have the ability to literally go beyond the planet and manipulate space around it. They could divert an asteroid to come crashing onto the planet, like in the Stargate where Anubis was diverting a Naquita-enhanced asteroid. And we don't have any warp drive to send the asteroid through the planet on the other side. No, we'd have to depend on the Armageddon crew, and I don't think that would work quite as well as it does in the movies.